Imagine you're at the mall and you see a 13-year-old girl with an older man. And you think to yourself, well, maybe it's her father. There are plenty of kids at the mall. But then you notice that she's wearing a lot of makeup and she's wearing really dressed up clothes out of proportion to her age. They're showing a lot of skin. And you say to yourself, wow, if that had been me out in public like that, I would have been grounded forever. It's none of my business. Or maybe you're on a street corner and you see a 15-year-old boy. Looks more like he's 12, and it's late at night on a school night, and you're wondering, what's he doing there? Is he waiting for friends? Is he waiting for drugs? He seems anxious. He's thin. He's pale. You say, well, it's not my business, and you cross to the other side. Or maybe you're at a party, and you see a Hispanic house servant who's being berated by the hostess. And you think to yourself, wow, what's her story? And you say again, it's not my business. I probably will never see her again. What do you think you've seen? It's hidden in plain sight. What if I told you that all of these people were victims of human trafficking? What if I told you each one of them has their own story? The 13-year-old was sexually molested by her stepfather at age 5. She was then lured into the sex trade, trading sex for favors, by her best friend's father. The 15-year-old is a chronic runaway, bullied at school, indifferent parents, and now he's hooked up with a pimp on the streets who also has 3 other boys, and they trade sex for drugs. The Latino 20-year-old housekeeper was sold by her parents in Central America, brought to this country by her employers, and is an indentured servant. She works 20-hour days, sleeps on the laundry room floor, is not allowed to leave the house, and they keep her identity paper. Human trafficking is the illegal trade of human beings for commercial gain. It is prevalent throughout the world. There are over 21 million victims of trafficking. The UN estimates that it is a $10 billion business annually, and it equals the drug trade and the illegal arms trade. There are essentially 20 million victims, of which more than half are children under the age of 18. They are trafficked from countries, 127 in the red, to 137 countries in the blue. And guess what? In Florida, we're number 2, and trying hard to become number 1. So, what is human trafficking? Well, there are 2 main kinds. Number 1 is sex trafficking. And sex trafficking has over 1 million children involved in it. Girls predominantly age 12 and boys who average age 11. They're made to have 20 to 50 partners a day. They're not your old street corner prostitutes. This is much more sophisticated now. There are websites online like Backpage, which was just recently closed by the federal government, that sell children and trade in humans. Now, I'm sure there will be new websites that will take Backpage's place, but there's also escort services, modeling agencies, international matchmaking agencies who will fill that particular niche as well. Labor trafficking is much more prevalent. It involves, again, child labor in the majority. These children are made to work in agriculture, which is number 1, but also there are indentured servants in the hospitality business, hotels, restaurants, and even construction. Employment agencies trade in these human beings, au pair services throughout the world, which bring to us slaves. in which we commercially use. So now you're asking yourself, well, what makes these children, what makes these people particularly susceptible to human trafficking? Well, we know that actually there is a marker in most of them, particularly the children. They are more likely to have had a history of violence, either personal violence or within their families or even in their communities. They are the chronic runaways who within 48 hours are lured up into the trafficking business. They are also those kids in foster care. But don't fool yourself. They're also those kids in suburbia who now trade themselves for personal expensive gifts and false love. So we're all susceptible, but in particular, children are vulnerable. These are the most neglected, vulnerable, and indefensible of human beings. They have lost their childhood. They're exposed to physical illnesses and psychological traumas at a greater rate. And as a result, they have developed a higher rate of death. Even if they survive, even if they're rescued, scars and the effect of human trafficking remain with them their entire lives. Research has shown us that neglect and violence and trauma in childhood, especially in the developmental brain, results in a state of physical change. That physical change is manifested predominantly through stress hormones. They're higher. They result in a chronic state of flight or fight. And as a result, they have higher rates of high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease. They also have higher rates of inflammatory markers, which has been linked to a higher prevalence of cancer. When these traumas occur in the developmental brain, the neural pathways and wiring is altered. So that what happens is you'll see cognitive impairment, you'll see changes in their affect, they're blunted, they're depressed, and as a result, they have also higher prevalence of risky behaviors, higher smoking, higher drug abuse, overeating, undereating, alcohol, which further lead to disabilities and higher rates of illnesses, and again, contributing to their higher rates of death. So when we look at these individuals, it's important to see them. It's important to recognize who they are and what is happening to them. Some of you are saying, well, shouldn't I see some evidence of restraint? Most traffickers actually control their victims psychologically through threats, through fear, through creating a lack of trust of others and a dependency on them. I'm a physician. I work at the University of Miami Medical School and Jackson Memorial Hospital, and we've seen a fair amount of things. One thing that's unique amongst traffickers and traffic victim is the so-called branding that they used to do with slaves. Well, now it's modernized. They're tattoos that indicate property. Barcodes, the name of the trafficker in unusual places. Evidence that they're just commodities, money-making machines. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see one of those tracking devices that are in dogs and cats. Well, this one was in a young girl. So, if you're trying to identify them, look for the signs. They're hidden in plain sight. Now, you're saying to yourself, well, I'm ready. I'm going to be Superman. I'm going to help them escape. I'm going to save the day. It's actually tougher than you think. One of the things that happens with these victims is they've been conditioned not to trust anyone. And so they're not going to readily escape. They're also very likely to fear personal retaliation or retaliation to their families back home. And so they're not going to escape. They're also going to have guilt of leaving their friends or family behind. And they have something that we see in hostages, which is trauma bonding. They're so dependent on their traffickers for survival that they bonded with them. So it's not so simple. There are no quick fixes. And instead of thinking that you're going to be the Superman, reach for the real Superman. The people who work in the field, who are experts, and who know how to intervene. This is a list of national as well as local superheroes who do make a difference. They not only rescue the traffic victims, but they also provide shelter, clothing, resources for them to be able to make new lives for themselves. So be aware in your community of what's available. Reach out and involve them. They're 24/7 services. My involvement with human trafficking was with my colleagues at the University of Miami Medical School. We recognized the gap in health care for victims of human trafficking, and we founded a free clinic called Project Thrive. The departments, we have representatives from the departments of OBGYN, internal medicine, psychiatry, and pediatrics who volunteer their time and come together to be able to treat the victims who we no longer refer to as victims, but refer to as survivors. It's trauma-based informed care. It recognizes the vulnerability of this group, and we've generously been given the space and resources at Jackson Memorial Hospital to have our clinic and to grow it so that we can be available to these victims. They're referred to us from multiple sources. We acknowledge their strengths and their ability to survive, and we offer them the fact that they are human beings that we respect, and we give them their dignity back, and also give them the choices and help them navigate those choices because they've never been given that before. So I urge all of you to see the victims, acknowledge them as human beings. Get involved. There are multiple places that you can volunteer. Know the resources in your community and become involved with them. You can make a difference. All of us together can make a difference. Small things can make a difference, and if we magnify them by millions, we can change the face of human trafficking. How many of you eat chocolate? Come on. How many of you know how it's produced? The majority of the chocolate trade comes from West Africa and is harvested and manufactured through child labor. That child labor involves 5-, 6-, and 7-year-olds who are either sold or stolen from their families and brought to West Africa to be able to work in the cocoa bean fields. They work long days, usually for no pay, and they have no chance of ever getting out of that situation until and when they physically become useless. And then they're turned away with no chance of ever making it as adults. So the next time you eat that chocolate bar, don't just feel guilty. Look for the fair trade label. Make sure you're not eating slave-produced chocolate. All of us together can stop human trafficking if we just see it for what it is. Thank you.